Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's your boy D Black coming back with another Raw review. And remember, always raw and uncut. And please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment. Alright, Raw tonight. It was a bit boring. Wasn't too bad, but it was a bit boring and stuff. But anyway, we're going to get right into it. So we have Stephanie Valkyria coming out to the ring. You know, and she's saying that she's here tonight to collect her title and stuff. And I mean, everybody is saying that. Once they get a title, losing, yeah, they're coming back to collect the title and stuff. It's an ongoing thing. And then she calls out Liv Morgan, and Liv Morgan comes out with the Judgment Day and stuff. And Liv says to Stephanie that she's has a lot on her mind, and then goes on to say that Becky that Becky Lynch likes to say while she has the title around her belt, around her, it neglects all the women that held the title before her. And then Liv says that she doesn't care what Becky thinks about the women before her and the women after her, because she's not, a champion for those women. And then she goes on to say that she's not the champion for the people, and then says that she's the champion, for herself. Then says that she's not afraid. Then she tells Stephanie Valkyria that she's not afraid of her. And then she reminds Stephanie that she beat her at WrestleMania, and then beat her again after WrestleMania, and then she's the one that put her on the shelf and everything. And then Liv goes on to say that she's about to become the longest reigning champion, women's champion, of all time. You know, and then Stephanie looks at Liv while she's standing outside the ring, saying that you're outside the ring and you're talking all that crap and everything. Why don't you get in the ring, and come talk your talk and come fight her? And then Liv in the Judgment Day, they approach the ring, with Roxanne and Raquel. They approach the ring and they get in the ring, and then they attack Stephanie Valkyria. She tries to fight back and everything, the best way that she can and stuff, and then they're beating her up, and then out comes Becky Lynch. Then Becky Lynch comes out to help, and they accidentally hits, they run into each other. Becky and Stephanie run into each other and stuff like that. And then Stephanie gets into Becky's face, and then they're, kind of bickering about what just happened and everything, because, they're both going after the world title and stuff. And then Judgment Day, Liv takes out, Becky and stuff, and then they start destroying Stephanie Valkyria. They put Becky on. They run Becky into the turnbuckle. They get back in the ring. They beat down Stephanie Valkyria and stuff, and they leave Stephanie laying and stuff. So it's going to be pretty interesting. I know the match is going to happen and stuff. I guess they're trying to set up everything for Sunday night main event, which will be coming up in September on the 6th and stuff. And then we get, Jimmy Uso. Well, we get the Usos, Jimmy and Jay Uso, talking to Solo, and they're telling him to come on out and everything. They're kind of clowning him and everything, because they're taking him to go ahead and, to meet Roman Reigns and stuff, because that was a stipulation of the match that they had last week, on SmackDown. I mean, not on SmackDown, but on Raw, and Jay beat Solo, so, and everything. So they passed by LA Knight and everything. Nothing was said, nothing was done. Then we get a impromptu match with Javon Evans and JD McDonaugh. The match is pretty cool. It was good and everything, so like that. Javon wins with the OG cutter. And then again, for the third week in a row, Big Cass comes out and destroys Javon Evans. And I'm not getting why it's happening, but he's been dog walking Javon Evans. And then after he beats Javon Evans up and lays him in the ring and gets out of the ring, then he tells Big Cass, "Is that all you got?" And then Big Cash comes back to the ring. Javon Evans kind of gets up on him and everything and stuff for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, Dom Mysterio, Dom gets involved and everything. He takes Javon Evans and he shoves him into the turnbuckle and everything. And then Big Cass takes over from there and he destroys Javon Evans again. So I'm sure that match is going to get set up for a Saturday Night Main Event also. But anyway, then we move on to this tournament that's going on with the Luchadors to see who's going to be number one contender to face Roman Reigns, for the World Championship. And then we get the match with Rey Fenix and El Fiscal. The match was okay, Luchadors, they're flying, high flyers and stuff like that, doing their thing and stuff like that. Rey Fenix hits the Mexican Muscle Buster and wins the match and moves on. Then we got Stephanie. We got Kathy talking to Stephanie Valkyria. Stephanie saying that next week, Kathy is asking Stephanie about facing Roxanne Perez next week, for her first match after being out so long since WrestleMania. And then Stephanie says that Liv needs 3 people, to help her. Well, there's 3. There's 2, and then counting Liv, I guess it's 3 and stuff, to deal with her. Then says Roxanne, is kind of different in that she's not, she hasn't forgotten about, what Roxanne did and everything. And this time when she faces me, she says it's personal, with Roxanne. And Becky comes out and says that Stephanie, kind of messed up. She was a little bit pissed off at her, from the encounter they had, in the ring with, the Judgment Day and stuff. And then Stephanie was telling Becky that she didn't ask her, to come out to help her, and she doesn't need Becky's help and stuff. And then tells Becky that, Roxanne is her problem now, and not to make herself her next problem and stuff. So, and then Becky gets in Stephanie face, and Becky tells her as long as she's keeps going after the women's title, that she's not her next problem, that she's her next biggest problem. And then walks off, and then comes back, and she tells Stephanie, good luck with her match next week, against Roxanne, and hopes that there's no interference and everything, and everybody follows the rules perfectly. And then tells Stephanie that she'll be, watching the match, and then she walks off. Then we get a match with Solo Ruka and Lyra. This was probably the first match that I've seen, so Ruka didn't really mess up a lot. I mean, some of her high flying moves are pretty questionable, and look like she's about to kill herself on some of the moves that she does and everything. But ultimately, she ends up hitting Lyra with the Soul Snatcher for the win. Then we get Jey Uso, asking Jacob, because Jacob and Jimmy and Jay, they're all together. And then Jay asks Jacob, why does he look so sad and everything, and he's telling Jacob that, hey, look, he did what he had to do and everything. He beat Solo, and then Jacob's telling him that he didn't do it alone. He had help with Jimmy and everything. And Jay said it doesn't even matter because they got the job done. They did something that he couldn't do and stuff. So now they're bringing Solo to the OTC, Roman Reigns. And then Jay says to Jay says to Jacob, who's the punk ass now? And then they walk off. And then we get the backstage where Kathy Kelly talking to the Vision. And Logan Paul, saying that, they run the place, as far as tag teams and stuff like that. And this is, they're the ones that are on top and everything. And if anyone gets in their way, they're going to get smashed And then Austin Theory gets on the mic and said that him and Bron Breaker, they're the tag team champions and stuff like that. And then he starts talking about Rox. What's the girl's name? Dupree and stuff. And, about being his girl and all this other craziness and stuff like that. And then Kathy asks Bron Breaker, what does he have to say, about being the future. But again, I forgot to say this, that Austin Theory did mention Obafemi, when Obafemi, took his butt out and everything and said that Oba is a problem, that he can't forget and everything. So I'm thinking that Oba's gonna face Austin Theory first before he faces Bron Breaker and stuff. But we'll see what happens in the weeks to come and stuff. And then Kathy asked Bron Breaker, what does he have to say about Over, you know, what does he have to say anything about Over being the face or the future, you know, um, of the WWE? And then Bron Breaker says that, hey, if anything that he has to say to Over, he can say that he's going to say it to his face. Then he walks out to the ring and everything, and then he calls out Over Femi. And then Paul Heyman, he comes out, saying that he was an advocate, saying that he was an oracle, and saying more, than that he's a wise man, and he knows what's wise to do and what's not so wise to do. And then he says it's wise, on everyone's mind to know who the future of WWE is. Then Bron Breakker gets in Paul Heyman's face and he asks Paul Heyman, who does he think, is the future, of the WWE? And then out comes Oba Femi, you know. And then Oba, tells Bron Breakker, hey, you talking all that yak and everything and stuff, and that he knows who the future is. Yeah. And that the people know who the future is. And everybody knows who the future is. And if he has a problem with it, then, say something, do something about it. And then Bron Breakker, says, hey, look, let's do it. Let's do it right now and everything. And then Paul steps in between them and stuff. And he says to Bron Breakker, if he takes one more step to over Femi, then he can step away from him forever and everything. And then Paul goes on to say that the WWE, is a big business. They have partnerships and everything. And they're the biggest thing on the planet. And they don't just, answer to the people's lives, and they don't answer to the people at home. They answer to all the shareholders. Then says it won't be popular for him to say, it's not going to be popular for what he's going to say. And he says that two of them in the ring, understand what's going on, and there's one who doesn't, and it appears to be still learning. And then says, here's what he knows, after being in the business for about 40 years, when two main eventers are in the ring at the same time, you don't make an impromptu match, to find out who the future is. He goes on to say that the future is, someone who understands the box office. Then he goes on to say that the future is someone who understands main event. Then he goes on to say that the future understands to how to promote, the match to be the biggest, it can possibly be, on any event and stuff like that. And then he says that he's already set it up, with Adam Pearce, for Saturday night's main event and everything in Atlanta, in Bron Breaker's hometown. But that usually doesn't mean anything if you're in the hometown. Because if you're in the hometown, you're still going to get beat. It's been done and stuff. So that's nothing. You could have home field advantage or whatever the case may be and stuff, but the people love OBA, and we already know where that future's going and stuff. You know, a long time ago when the vision was actually out and everything, and you know, Paul Heyman did say that you know Braun Breaker would be you know main eventing you know the next 5 WrestleMania. So we're going to see how long does this go because I don't think it's going to go too far because I think once Obafemi gets his hands on Braun Breaker, there's no way that Braun Breaker should be beating Obafemi. And if that goes down that way, I'm done. I'm done with wrestling. But I don't think it's going to happen and stuff. But anyway, you know, so Obafemi, you know, versus Braun Breaker, you know, September 6th at Sunday Night Main Event. Then I guess we'll find out, you know, who's going to be the future of the WWE. You know, and then Paul Heyman, he gets out. Well, actually, he shakes Braun Breaker's hand. And as Braun Breaker gets out of the ring and Paul gets ready to get out, he goes back and he shakes Obafemi's hand. And then Braun Breaker's looking at him like he's crazy and retarded, or whatever the case may be, and stuff. But this is going to be an interesting match between Braun Breaker and Obafemi. And I'm here to tell you, you know, I know Braun Breaker's a tough guy and stuff like that, but Obafemi, he's the one. If you agree or disagree, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment. Let me know if you agree or disagree with me. Just let me know. Don't forget to subscribe. Then we get the match with Dragon Lee and Dr. Wagner Jr. and everything is for, you know, the Luchador #1 contender to see who's going to face Roman Reigns, you know, for the title and stuff. And the match is okay, you know, Luchadors. I mean, Dr. Wagner, I mean, he's okay, but he's not all that and everything. But anyway, Dragon Lee wins the match with Operation Dragon and everything, and he wins it and he moves on and stuff. And then we got the IC title match with Rey Mysterio against Chad Gable. Now, this match was a pretty good match. I'm going to tell you right now, Rey Mysterio still got it going on and stuff. And we already know that Chad Gable is pretty good in the ring and stuff. You know, I mean, they were brawling and stuff, and it was a good match. It was an actually decent, good match and stuff. And then it ends up, you know, Chad Gable he does get Rey Mysterio's, you know, leg and everything. He puts it in the ankle lock and stuff like that. You know, Ray's trying to fight out of the ankle lock and stuff, and all of a sudden Ray rolls Chad Gable up, and then Chad Gable reverses the roll up, and he gets to 1, 2, 3, and he wins, and he retains the IC title. And then we get Roman Reigns, you know, and the Usos, you know, bringing out Solo Sikoa to see if he gets to the bloodline or he acknowledges Roman Reigns in the bloodline. And then Roman Reigns, you know, he's coming out, you know, and he said that, you know, he's waiting. He gets his acknowledgement from the Buffalo crowd and stuff like that and said that he's waiting, you know, on the Usos to bring out Solo. So he tells them to bring him out and everything. And then Roman's saying that he's, you know, ready to receive all his receipts. You know, he's been waiting to receive all his receipts, you know, and he tells the Usos, you know, to finally bring out Solo and everything. And then the Usos are clowning Solo as they're coming down the walkway and stuff. And then Roman says, you know, to Solo that it pisses him off. You know, he says the side of him pisses him off and everything. And he says when he beat Solo, you know, at the premiere of Raw, and remember that premiere of Raw was to fight. It was Solo against Roman Reigns for the Ula Fala, and whoever won that match, you know, would have to acknowledge, you know, the person who won. And Roman Reigns won that match, and Solo never acknowledged. They never had the acknowledgement ceremony or whatever the case may be and stuff. And then Roman shows him a film of the, you know, the match, and then how, you know, he beat him and everything, and how he was supposed to come out, you know, and how he was supposed to, you know, acknowledge, you know, Roman Reigns, and Roman was telling him that, you know, he's been holding out, you know, and stuff. You know, Solo had that little smirk on his face, and then Roman asked Solo, you know, what does he think, you know, what's funny? And then Jacob attacks Solo And Roman says, "It's not funny now anymore, is it?" You know, and he tells him to stay. Then he tells Solo to stay on the mat, and he tells him that the Usos, then he goes on and says that the Usos are his captains, and if you don't, and if you disrespect them, then you disrespect him. And he puts the black Ula follows on him, but he didn't put anything on Jacob, which is pretty weird. And Jacob is over there looking pretty stunned and everything, watching Roman put on those black Ula follows on Jimmy and Jay and stuff. And as that's going on, then LA Knight comes out, you know, and stuff, and he's standing in the ring face to face with Roman. Then all of a sudden, Jacob Fatu, attacks LA Knight. Then Roman Reigns stops him. Then Roman Reigns hits LA Knight with a Superman punch and everything. And then he tells Solo, he gets the Usos to grab him, to grab LA Knight and hold him up. And he tells Solo, to get him to take LA Knight out and stuff. And then then Solo, grabs LA Knight and he's saying that, he's sorry and stuff like that and everything. And he sets up and everything. And all of a sudden he turns around and he spikes Roman Reigns. And you can tell that that's what's going to happen, Solo said that he was never going to ever say that he acknowledges Roman Reigns. So you already knew that this was going to happen and stuff. The way that it was going in, how everything was being set up, you already knew that Solo was not going to bow down to Roman Reigns or the Usos or the Bloodline and stuff like that. Even though, Roman was telling Solo that, his family's there and stuff like that, and he owes it to the Bloodline and stuff to be in the Bloodline and stuff like that. But when he spiked his ass and everything, Roman dropped hard and everything, and then Solo takes out, the Usos and everything. And then Roman Reigns tries to Superman LA Knight, and then LA Knight hits him with the BTF and and everything. But was crazy, but Jacob didn't do anything. He was just standing there, just not doing nothing. Roman gets taken out, the Usos get taken out, you know, and stuff like that. And then LA Knight and Solo, they give each other a dab and everything, and they leave the ring with Roman lying in it and stuff, which was crazy. So this is gonna get interesting. It's gonna get pretty good. So we got to see what happens. This ain't the end. Solo, and LA Knight, together against the Bloodline. I don't know what's gonna happen towards the ending of that, but I know LA Knight has a match coming up with Roman Reigns, so we'll see what happens with that. It's gonna be pretty interesting. But anyway, like I said, tonight's show, it was kind of boring. It kind of made it seemed exciting, but it really wasn't. Some of the matches were pretty slow, and just nothing to make you want to stand up and say, "Hey, this show was great." It wasn't really a bad show, but it wasn't really a good show. So at that, out of 10, I'm gonna give it a 4. It was kind of mid, but I'm gonna give it a 4 and everything. Okay. So please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment. Let me know how you feel, if you agree or disagree. So, thank you for watching. God bless. Deuces. And I'll see y'all on the next video. Thank you.